Room. The Viridia Prime Orbital Academy hung in the quiet dark above the blue-green swirl of its namesake planet, a jewel of glass and steel where the future leaders of the Galactic Concord trained side by side. Cadets from dozens of species walked its polished corridors, their uniforms marked by species rank and academy house. Among them moved Lena Rourke, a human cadet from Kalos III, a world so dangerous it was listed in official records as a death world. Lena did not wear her origin like a badge. She spoke little, moved with calm precision, and never bragged about surviving childhood on a planet where the rain could burn skin and the trees sometimes hunted in packs, but others noticed. Instructors watched her during survival drills, impressed by how she read terrain like a story, how she stayed calm when sim beasts lunged from the fog, how she always checked her gear twice before any exercise. She wasn't flashy, but she was solid, like bedrock. Her only real friend at the academy was Daniel Brooks. He came from Luna Colony 7, a quiet boy with steady hands and a dry sense of humor. He wasn't from a death world, but he respected what Lena had endured. They met during basic field training, when a malfunctioning drone nearly crushed a squad mate. While others froze, Lena tackled the cadet out of the way, rolled through the impact, and jammed the drone's power core with a rock she'd picked up without even looking. Daniel had been there. He never forgot it. After that, they trained together. Daniel learned how to tie knots that held in acid rain, how to listen for the hum of predator nests, how to sleep with one ear open. Lena, in turn, softened a little around him. She'd smile, just a small lift at the corner of her mouth when he got a technique right. Sometimes, after lights out, they'd sit on the observation deck, watching Viridia's storms flicker below and talk about Earth, about Kalos, about what they wanted after graduation. Lena wanted to serve on a frontier peacekeeping detail. Daniel wanted to design safer training sims so no one else had to learn survival the hard way. But not everyone saw Lena as a person. To many of the Virelians, tall, silver-eyed beings from a planet of polished cities and ancient bloodlines, humans were crude. And Deathworlders? Worse than crude. To them, anyone who came from a world like Kalos was barely civilized, shaped more by violence than reason. They tolerated humans in the Concord because Earth's fleet was useful, but respect was another matter. Kale Torvix was the worst of them. A Virelian noble cadet with perfect posture and colder eyes, he led a tight circle of elite students who sneered at mud-born species. He made no secret of his disdain for Lena. During joint drills, he'd accidentally block her path, knock her gear loose, or whisper insults in Virelian so only nearby cadets would catch the tone if not the words. Lena ignored him. She had been dealing with predators since she was 6. Torvix was just another one, loud but not smart. Daniel wasn't so calm. He wanted to confront Torvix more than once, but Lena always stopped him. "He's not worth the trouble," she'd say. "We're here to graduate, not start fights." So Daniel bit his tongue, though his hands clenched every time Torvix passed them in the hall with that smug half-smile. The final field exercise of the term was held in high orbit, a zero-gravity survival sim inside a derelict freighter module. Cadets were paired to repair life support, reroute power, and extract a simulated distress beacon while managing oxygen, radiation, and system failures. Lena and Daniel were assigned together as usual. Torvix and 2 of his friends were in the same module, working a separate quadrant. The exercise began smoothly. Lena moved through the dark corridors like she'd been born in them, her magnetic boots clicking softly, her hands already tracing wire paths before the diagnostic even finished loading. Daniel followed, handing her tools, watching her back. They were ahead of schedule. Then, during a routine tether check before an external hull walk, something felt wrong. Lena tugged her safety line. It held. But when she clipped it to the anchor point outside, the release mechanism clicked oddly. She frowned, tested it again. Still okay. She glanced at Daniel. "Feels off," she murmured. But the clock was ticking and the beacon signal was fading. She went out. 30 seconds later, the tether snapped. It wasn't a clean break. The carabiner sheared clean through, as if weakened by repeated stress or chemical corrosion. Lena had no time to react. One moment she was reaching for a panel on the hull, the next she was tumbling into open space, arms flailing, voice cut off by vacuum. Daniel saw it happen through the viewport. He screamed her name, though no sound carried in space. He scrambled for the emergency retrieval drone, but it was offline. System error. The console blinked. By the time backup arrived, Lena was gone, her suit's beacon blinking weakly before fading into the starfield. The Academy called it a tragic accident, a faulty batch of tethers, they said, bad luck. An investigation was opened, then quietly closed. Torvix gave a statement saying he saw nothing unusual. His friends backed him up. No one questioned why only Lena's tether failed. No one checked the drone logs that showed it had been remotely disabled minutes before the incident. Daniel demanded answers. He showed the gearmaster the broken carabiner. The metal was pitted not from wear but from deliberate acid scoring. He pointed out the drone's shutdown code matched a Varelian command protocol. But the Academy brass shook their heads. Circumstantial, they said. Grief makes us see patterns that aren't there. Lena's body was never recovered. A memorial service was held in the Academy chapel. Most cadets attended out of respect. Torvik stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes dry. Daniel stood alone by the memorial plaque afterward, fingers tracing the freshly etched letters of her name. He didn't cry, not then, but something inside him hardened, like Kayla's stone under pressure. He remembered Lena's voice on the observation deck, soft but sure. Out there, the universe doesn't care if you're noble or nobody. It only cares if you're ready. She had been ready. They hadn't been, and now Daniel knew. He had to become ready for something else entirely. Part 2. Daniel Brooks walked out of the Viridia Prime, Orbital Academy for the last time with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and silence in his chest. The discharge papers felt light in his hand, but the weight inside him was crushing. No one stopped him. No one said goodbye. The corridors that once buzzed with cadets now felt hollow, like a shell after the creature inside had crawled away. He boarded a civilian freighter bound for Earth without looking back. Back on Luna Colony 7, his old apartment felt too quiet. The walls seemed to press in, filled with memories of training logs, shared meals, and Lena's rare laugh. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw her tumbling into the void, her tether snapping like a dry twig. He stopped eating. He stopped answering messages. Friends from the colony left food at his door, but he barely touched it. One evening, a message came through an old military channel. It was from a retired sergeant named Frank Delgado, a human who'd served on Kalos III during the early Concord surveys. He'd heard about Lena. He'd also heard about Daniel's discharge. The message was short. If you want truth, come to New Carthage. Bring boots. Leave the rest. Daniel packed what little he owned and took the next shuttle to Mars, then a cargo hauler to the outer rim. New Carthage was a dusty port town on the edge of settled space, where the law was thin and loyalty ran deep. Frank met him at the spaceport, a grizzled man with a cybernetic arm and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered work. You think the Concorde will fix this? Frank asked over a meal of rehydrated stew. They protect their own. The Varelians have credits, fleets, influence. You're just a kid with a grudge. I'm not here for the Concorde, Daniel said quietly. I'm here for Lena. Frank studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Good, because justice doesn't come from committees. It comes from hands. Over the next weeks, Daniel trained harder than he ever had at the Academy. Frank taught him how to bypass security grids, how to move unseen, how to read a lie in someone's eyes. He introduced Daniel to others, former soldiers, smugglers, engineers who owed favors to Deathworlders. One woman, a Kalos-born medic named Mara, showed him how to brew antidotes from common plants. Another, a shipwright named Eli, taught him how to jury-rig comms to send ghost signals. But Daniel knew he needed more than skills. He needed to understand what made Lena who she was. So when Frank suggested a trip to Kalos III, Daniel didn't hesitate. The planet was worse than the Academy simulators had shown. The air tasted metallic. The ground shifted underfoot, alive with burrowing things. Storms rolled in without warning, spitting acid rain that ate through synth fabric in minutes. The few human settlements clung to shielded valleys, surrounded by walls humming with energy fields. There, in a village called Iron Hollow, Daniel met Elder Nessa. She was Lena's distant cousin, her face lined with scars and wisdom. She listened to his story without interrupting. When he finished, she poured him a cup of bitter root tea and said, You loved her like a sister. I did, Daniel said. Then you must walk the path of echoes, she told him. It is not a path of killing. It is a path of making sure the dead are not forgotten. On Kalos, we do not let silence bury our own. The Path of Echoes was an old ritual, rarely used since humans joined the conquered. It involved surviving 3 trials in the wilds alone, facing fear, facing loss, and facing truth. Daniel agreed. He stripped down to basic gear, no comms, no weapons beyond a survival knife. For 10 days he wandered the razor-thorn forests, drank from poison streams he had to purify himself, and slept in caves where things with too many eyes watched from the dark. On the 7th night, a storm hit. Lightning split the sky and the ground trembled. Daniel took shelter under an overhang, shivering, exhausted. He thought of Lena doing this as a child, not for ritual but for survival. She never complained. She never asked for easier. She just endured. In that moment, something clicked. His grief didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It became focus. It became purpose. When he returned to Iron Hollow, gaunt but steady, Elder Nessa nodded. "Now you carry her voice," she said. "Use it wisely." Back on New Carthage, Daniel began to plan. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew systems. He studied Varelian shipping routes, security protocols, social habits. He learned that Kale Torvix came from a powerful family that owned luxury resorts, private yachts, and orbital estates. They were proud, and pride, Daniel realized, was their weakness. He built a small ship from scrap parts with Eli's help, a fast, silent runner painted matte black. He coded a virus that could mimic Varelian maintenance signals. He practiced until his hands moved without thought. His first target wasn't Torvix. It was a message. A Varelian pleasure cruiser drifted near the Helios belt, its crew hosting a gala for young nobles. At exactly 2200 hours, every light on board went out. Comms died. Life support cycled into emergency mode. Panic spread. By the time backup arrived, the ship was empty of guests. But on the captain's chair sat a single thorn from Kalos, wrapped in black cloth. No one was hurt, but everyone saw it. The next week, a Varelian data hub on Cygnus Station suffered a glitch. All public records related to cadet accidents in the last 5 years were duplicated and sent to every major news outlet, with Lena Rourke's file highlighted in red. Then came the yacht. Kale Torvix's personal vessel, the Silver Wing, was found adrift near the Ophian shipyards. Its hull was intact, but inside every luxury item had been smashed. Torvix's ceremonial armor, passed down for generations, was dented, scorched, and hung from the mainmast like a warning. On the bridge wall, carved deep into the metal, were 3 words. Remember Lena Rourke. Torvix survived. He'd been planetside during the breach, but his reputation was in ruins. The Varelian High Council demanded answers. The Concord opened a new inquiry, pressured by whispers in the media and unease among human delegations. Daniel watched it all from the shadows. He didn't feel joy. He felt resolve. He knew this was only the beginning. The Concord would try to bury it again. The Varelians would call it terrorism. But he didn't care. He wasn't trying to win a debate. He was making sure Lena's name could never be ignored again. One night, alone in his ship, he pinned her cadet badge to his chest. It was the only thing he'd kept from the academy. He looked at his reflection in the dark viewport. Tired eyes, short hair, a face that had aged years in months. "I'm not done," he whispered. And somewhere, in the endless dark between stars, it felt like she heard him. Part 3. The galaxy began to whisper. At first, it was just rumors in port bars and encrypted news feeds, strange events near Varelian holdings, silent ships, symbols left behind. But soon the whispers grew louder. Human colonies on the fringe started sharing stories of their own. Cadets denied promotions. Deathworlders turned away from conquered academies. Complaints ignored because they're used to hardship. Lena Rourke's name became a spark. Daniel Brooks stayed hidden, moving from Shadowport to Dead Zone, always one step ahead. His ship, the Raven's Wing, was small and unmarked, built for speed and silence. He slept in shifts, ate ration bars, and checked every system twice. He knew the Concord had put a bounty on his head, not for violence, but for disrupting galactic order. The Varelians called him a terrorist. The humans in power called him a rogue. But in the outer colonies, some called him something else, a reckoner. He didn't act without reason. Each move was precise. He never harmed civilians. He never fired a weapon unless cornered. His goal wasn't blood, it was memory. He wanted the galaxy to remember that Lena wasn't just a statistic. She was a person, a cadet, a friend. His next target was the Varelian Heritage Gala on the orbital station Celestia Prime. It was a glittering event where nobles showed off wealth, art, and influence. Torvix would be there, trying to rebuild his image. Daniel didn't plan to crash the party. He planned to speak at it. Using a stolen maintenance drone and a forged clearance code, he slipped into the station's broadcast hub hours before the gala began. The system was old, patched together over decades. Easy to crack. He uploaded a single file, a short message, no more than 2 minutes long, and set it to override all public channels during the main toast. Then he vanished into the service tunnels, watching through a cracked viewport as the gala filled with silver-robed Varelians and their guests. Music played. Crystal glasses clinked. Torvik stood near the center, smiling tightly, his armor newly polished. At exactly 2,000 hours, the lights dimmed. The music cut out. Every screen in the hall flickered and then showed Daniel's face. He stood on a rocky cliff under a stormy sky, wind tugging at his coat. Rain streaked the lens. Behind him, lightning lit up jagged peaks. He wore Lena's cadet badge over his heart. His voice was calm but firm. "I am not a terrorist," he began. "I am not a soldier. I am the friend of a cadet who trusted the Concorde to protect her. She trained hard. She followed every rule. And she died because someone thought her life was worth less than their pride." He paused. The hall was silent. Even the Varelian guards had stopped moving. Her name was Lena Rourke. She was from Kalos III. She bled in silence while officials filed reports and nobles laughed behind closed doors. "I won't let her be forgotten. And if you try to bury the truth again, I will keep speaking, until every species in this galaxy knows what happened." The screen cut to static. Then the gala's normal feed returned. But the damage was done. Torvik stood frozen, face pale. A human delegate in the back stood up slowly. Then another. Then a group of Kalos expats in the service crew stopped their work and turned toward the screens. No one shouted. No one fought. But something had shifted. The lie had been named in public, and now it couldn't be unseen. Within hours, the message spread. It played on colony networks, pirate radios, even school terminals and neutral zones. Humans shared it with pride. Some non-humans shared it with shame. The Concord scrambled to contain it. But the file was already in 1,000 hands. Daniel didn't stay to watch the fallout. He was already light years away, heading toward the Helios Ring, the site of the upcoming Unity Summit, where leaders from every conquered species would gather to renew treaties and discuss galactic policy. It was the most secure location in known space, and it was where he planned to end this, but getting in wouldn't be easy. The summit had layers of security, biometric scans, AI sentries, drone patrols, and a full Concord fleet in orbit. Yet Daniel had an advantage. He knew the system from the inside. He'd trained on Viridia, he knew how protocols bent under pressure, and he had help. A week before the summit, a freighter named the Mistral docked at Helios Ring for routine cargo drop-off. Its crew included a human engineer named Jess Carter, a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a past in Concord logistics. She'd known Lena during basic training. She'd also been passed over for promotion twice because she came from a high-gravity world. When Daniel reached out, she didn't hesitate. "I'll get you in," she said, "but you better make it count." On the day of the summit, Daniel boarded the Mistral disguised as a cargo tech. Jess had forged his ID, altered his biometrics with a skin patch, and routed his path through a maintenance corridor rarely monitored. He carried no weapons, just a data chip, Lena's badge, and a voice. Inside the ring, the air hummed with tension. Delegates in formal robes moved through wide halls lined with banners of every conquered species. Security drones hovered near every entrance. Daniel kept his head down, his steps steady. He knew he had one chance. His target was the Grand Chamber, the heart of the summit where speeches would be made and agreements signed. He slipped past a distracted guard, used a stolen keycard to access a service lift, and emerged in the upper gallery, hidden behind sound baffles. Below, the chamber filled. The Varelian ambassador took the podium, smooth and confident, speaking of unity and progress. Daniel waited. When the ambassador finished, the Concord chancellor stood to speak. That was his moment. He stepped into view, activated the chamber's emergency broadcast override, a back door Jess had left open, and spoke into the mic. Chancellor, ambassadors, you speak of unity, but your silence betrayed one of your own. Every head turned. Guards rushed the gallery, but Daniel didn't run. He stood tall, Lena's badge gleaming under the lights. Lena Rourke was a cadet. She wore your uniform. She believed in your ideals. And she was murdered because she came from a world you call savage. If that is your unity, then your Concord is built on sand. He held up the data chip. This contains the full logs from her suit, the drone's sabotage records, and the names of everyone who covered it up. I give it to you now, not as a threat, but as a test. Will you hide it again, or will you finally do what is right? He dropped the chip into the chamber below. It landed with a soft click on the polished floor. Then he raised his hands. I surrender. But her name stays. Guards seized him. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some shouting for his arrest, others demanding the chip be examined immediately. The Varelian ambassador turned pale. The human delegation stood as one. As they led Daniel away in cuffs, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had done what he came to do. The truth was no longer his alone. It belonged to everyone now, and in that moment the galaxy held its breath. Part 4. The grand chamber of the Helios ring fell into stunned silence after the guards dragged Daniel Brooks away. The data chip lay on the floor like a stone dropped in still water, its ripples spreading fast. At first no one moved. Then the human delegate from Earth's council stepped forward and picked it up. She didn't say a word. She just handed it to the Concord Chancellor, her eyes hard. The Chancellor, an old Qatari with silver scales and a voice like dry leaves, looked at the chip, then at the Varelian ambassador. This will be reviewed, he said, and his tone left no room for argument. Within the hour, the summit was suspended. Security teams locked down the ring. Daniel was placed in a holding cell, not harsh but secure. He expected interrogation, threats, maybe even a quiet disappearance. But none came. Instead, food was brought, water, a clean blanket, and silence. Outside his cell, the galaxy moved. News of his broadcast spread faster than any Concord sensor could stop it. Footage of him standing in the gallery, calm and clear-eyed, played on every major network. Humans on colony worlds gathered in squares and shipyards, holding candles or patches with Lena's name stitched in black thread. Even some non-human groups, those who had long felt ignored by the Concord elite, began speaking out. They called it the Rourke moment. A line had been crossed, and everyone knew it. Back on Viridia Prime, cadets who once stayed quiet now wore black armbands during drills. Instructors found notes left on desks. What would Lena do? The Academy Command tried to ban the armbands, but too many senior officers refused to enforce it. One human captain even pinned a small Kalos thorn to his uniform before morning roll call. No one dared remove it. The real pressure came from within the Concord itself. Human member worlds demanded a full public investigation. The Kalos III Provisional Government, long dismissed as too wild for full representation, sent an official statement. We mourn our daughter. Now we demand justice. Even neutral species like the gentle Lumen released a rare public comment. Truth should never require a martyr. Faced with rising unrest, the Concord Council had no choice. They activated Emergency Protocol Theta, a rarely used measure that allowed independent review of internal crimes by a mixed species tribunal. The data chip was analyzed by 3 separate teams. All confirmed the same thing. Lena's tether had been deliberately weakened with a Varelian-grade corrosion agent. The emergency drone had been disabled using a command code traceable to a terminal in Kale Torviks's private quarters. Torviks denied everything. He claimed his code had been stolen, but his 2 closest friends, under quiet questioning, cracked. One admitted they'd watched Torviks tamper with the gear. The other confessed to disabling the drone. They said Torviks called it a lesson for the Deathworlder who thought she belonged among nobles. The evidence was overwhelming. The Varelian High Council, desperate to save face, disowned Torviks publicly. They stripped him of his titles, froze his family assets, and handed him over to the Concord Tribunal. His friends received the same fate. For the first time in decades, a Varelian noble faced real consequences for harming a human. But Daniel knew the real test was still coming. Justice for Torviks was one thing. Change for the system was another. A week after his arrest, the Concord Chancellor visited his cell. He came alone, no guards, no aides. He sat across from Daniel on a simple bench and studied him for a long moment. "You could have killed him," the Chancellor said. "You had chances. Why didn't you?" "Because Lena wasn't killed by one man," Daniel replied. "She was killed by silence, by rules that protect the powerful. If I'd killed Torvix, I'd just be another ghost in the dark. But this way, people listen," the Chancellor nodded slowly. "You forced our hand." "I honored my friend," Daniel said. "That's all." The Chancellor stood. "The tribunal will convene in 3 days. You are invited to speak." Daniel didn't smile. He just said, "I'll be there." On the day of the tribunal, the chamber was packed. Delegates from every conquered species filled the seats. Humans sat together, many wearing simple black bands. Kalos representatives stood in the back, their faces unreadable but proud. Even a few Varelians attended, not nobles but common citizens who believed in fairness. Torvix and his friends stood in the accused dock, heads bowed. The evidence was presented. Witnesses spoke. Then the Chancellor turned to Daniel. "Daniel Brooks," he said, "you broke laws. You breached security. You caused panic. But you also exposed a truth we ignored. Speak now if you wish." Daniel stood. He wore no uniform, just plain clothes. But he still wore Lena's badge over his heart. "I'm not here for revenge," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I'm here because my friend believed in this Concord. She trained hard. She followed every rule. She thought if she proved herself, she'd be seen as equal. But they saw her origin, not her character." He looked at the Varelian section. "I don't hate your people. I hate the idea that someone's worth depends on where they were born. Kalos is harsh, yes, but it teaches strength, loyalty, respect for life. Lena had all of that, and she was thrown away like trash." He turned to the human delegates. "Don't let her death be just a story. Make sure no cadet ever feels alone because they're from a death world. Make sure no cover-up happens in the dark again." Then he looked at the Chancellor. "Honor her by changing the rules. Not just for humans. For everyone the Conquered calls lesser." He sat down. No one clapped, but many wiped their eyes. The tribunal's verdict came quickly. Torvix and his friends were found guilty of sabotage, conspiracy, and violation of the Cadet Protection Accord. They were sentenced to 20 years in a joint species correctional facility. No special treatment, no early release. But the real victory came after. The Conquered Council announced the Rourke Accord, a new set of laws guaranteeing equal treatment for all cadets, mandatory bias training for academy staff, and a permanent oversight committee with representatives from frontier and Deathworld colonies. As Daniel left the tribunal chamber, a young human cadet, a girl from a high-radiation world, stepped forward and handed him a small carved stone. It was shaped like a Kalos thorn. "For Lena," she whispered. Daniel took it. He didn't say thank you. He just nodded, and for the first time in months he felt something like peace. The galaxy hadn't been fixed, but it had been shaken, and sometimes that was enough to start rebuilding. Part 5. The Rourke Accord changed everything, but not all at once. Laws were passed, committees formed, and academy protocols rewritten. New cadets from Deathworlds, Kalos III, Vexus Minor, the sulfur plains of Harkin 9, were welcomed with open arms, not sideways glances. Instructors were trained to recognize bias, and cadet complaints now went straight to an independent review board. The name Lena Rourke appeared in official Conquered history modules, not as a footnote but as a turning point. Daniel Brooks watched it all from a distance. After the tribunal, the Conquered offered him a pardon, a medal, even a teaching post at Viridia Prime. He turned them all down. He didn't want honors. He didn't want to stand on stages. He had done what he set out to do. Now he needed to disappear. He left the Helios ring on a small transport bound for the outer colonies. No fanfare, no farewell speeches, just a duffel bag, the carved thorn from the young cadet, and Lena's badge tucked in his pocket. He knew some would call him a hero. Others would still call him a criminal. He didn't care. He had kept his promise. He settled on a quiet moon orbiting a gas giant near the Cygnus Rift, far from Conquered patrols, far from headlines. The settlement there was small, just a few dozen families who mined rare crystals and traded with passing freighters. They didn't ask questions. They saw a quiet man who fixed engines, taught kids how to read star charts, and never spoke of his past. That was enough, but the galaxy remembered. Every year on the date of Lena's death, a message would appear on unsecured channels, a short clip of her academy photo, her service number, and the words, "She served. She mattered." No one ever traced the source. Some said it was Daniel. Others said it was a network of Deathworlders keeping her memory alive. Either way, the message spread. On Kalos III, they built a memorial in Iron Hollow, a stone arch carved with the names of all who died far from home, with Lena's at the center. Elder Nessa lit a flame beneath it that never went out. Visitors came from across human space to leave tokens, a bootlace, a ration wrapper, a patch from a cadet uniform. Even a few Varelians came, heads bowed, leaving silver leaves as a sign of regret. Back on Viridia Prime, the Academy renamed the survival training dome the Rourke Wing. New cadets ran drills there, learning not just how to survive, but why it mattered to protect each other. Instructors told Lena's story, not as a tragedy but as a lesson in courage and loyalty. Daniel heard these things through old contacts. Frank Delgado sent word from New Carthage. Jess Carter, now working as a Concord logistics inspector, slipped updates into cargo manifests. Even Mara the medic sent a letter once written on Kalos bark paper. "The children here know her name. They say it like a prayer." He never replied, but sometimes on clear nights, he'd walk to the edge of the settlement and look up at the stars. He'd think of Lena on the observation deck, pointing out constellations, her voice soft but sure. He'd remember her saying, "Out there it's not about where you're from. It's about what you do," and he knew she'd be proud. Years passed. The Rourke Accord held. New laws followed. Better representation for frontier worlds, fairer trade deals, even joint species rescue teams for cadet emergencies. The Concord wasn't perfect, but it was trying, and that was something. One day a young man arrived on the moon. He wore a patched flight suit and carried a worn satchel. He asked for Daniel Brooks. The locals pointed to the repair shed on the ridge. The boy waited outside until Daniel came out, wiping grease from his hands. He looked at the stranger, then at the satchel. "I'm from Luna Colony 7, the boy said. "My sister was in the same intake as Lena. She said, 'You were the one who never gave up.'" Daniel didn't speak right away. He just studied the boy's face, the same tired eyes he once had, the same quiet anger. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "To learn," the boy said. "Not how to fight. How to make sure no one else gets forgotten." Daniel looked past him at the endless stars. Then he nodded toward the shed. "Grab a wrench. We'll start with engines. Truth is easier to carry when your hands are busy." And so it began again, not with vengeance, but with teaching. Not with silence, but with stories. Daniel never returned to the inner systems. He never sought fame, but his name lived on, not as a rebel or a ghost, but as the friend who kept a promise when the galaxy looked away, and in classrooms, on frontier outposts, in the quiet moments before a cadet's first solo flight. Someone would always say, "Remember Lena Rourke." Because of Daniel, they always would.